For Telesur, my name is Regan Devines in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with this evening's headlines. 161 dead and 300 still missing. The horror unfolds after Guatemala's deadly mudslides. Calls for an investigation into former Colombian President Alvaro Uribe and his link to a 1997 massacre. And the U.S. calls it a mistake, their attack of a Kunduz hospital that kills 22 under international scrutiny. The details on these stories and more now on From the South. Thank you for being here with us. The search continues in Guatemala for survivors of a mudslide, the death toll for which has risen to 161. To make matters worse, new rains are predicted in the coming hours, which could hamper the search for the more than 300 people still missing. The mud that swept over the El Cambre 2 neighborhood in Santa Catarina Pinula, which lies at the bottom of a deep ravine, is so deep that rescue workers are descending 12 meters through narrow shafts to reach the roofs of homes. The neighborhood has now been declared uninhabitable by Guatemala's National Disaster Reduction Commission.
We still hold out hope that there are people alive. The work has been slow and surgical, but as time goes on, we are advancing further and further in the recovery work.
Colombia's Attorney General has asked the Supreme Court to investigate former President Alvaro Uribe for collaborating with and financing paramilitary groups. Uribe has been accused of being involved with paramilitaries when he was governor of his home state Antioquia from 1995 to 1997. As governor, Uribe began a controversial program to create armed citizen policing groups referred to as the Convivir program. Through Convivir, Uribe recruited hundreds of civilians to work as spies and extra fighters in army-led operations. Convivir was also implicated in several killings in 1996 and 1997. Angry Peruvians took to the streets of Lima on Monday night to protest over an IMF and World Bank meeting and their relation to the Conga mining disaster. The action further commemorated the mining disaster itself, in which a truck accidentally spilled toxic materials, leading to severe health problems among the local population, with no company ever being held accountable. Both the IMF and the World Bank at the time had shares within the Conga mining. Communities are opposing the new Conga mine, with concerns over poisoning the water supply and the repression of protesters. The protest coincides with more protesters arriving to Lima to demonstrate against the La Bamba's mining project. Ria Mora was there.
Campesinos from Cotabambas and Grau, region of Apurímac in southern Peru, have traveled over 10 hours to reach Lima. They have come to the capital hoping to make the voices heard of those who are planning to continue protesting against the changes made to Las Bambas mining project.
The struggle continues right now. There is no truce. There is no agreement with us. We have not been informed. On the contrary, the ministers have met only with the mayors who have come to Lima and have set another meeting. We, the people of Cotabamba and Grau, did not know about, and in addition to that, there will be no attendance for that meeting.
Protesters claim they will not engage in dialogue until the state of emergency with its military presence is lifted. Their main demands are to reverse the changes made to the project that eliminated a secure transportation system for the minerals and added 2 new plants near the main river. Some ruling party's Congress members have also expressed disagreement with the decisions made.
Somos parte del gobierno, sin embargo.
We are part of the government. However, my position is in defense. I reiterate of the Department of Aropimac, which I represent, and to the last moment we are going to guarantee the right to life, to environment, and to employment. Those are fundamental issues that the mining company, MMG, is not respecting.
No está respetando.
Meanwhile, protests in support of these campesinos have expanded to the adjacent region of Abancay. The project, which would be the largest mine in the country, is nearly ready to start, but the conflict has left its launch uncertain. Rael Mora, Telesur, Peru.
Honduras' National Congress Vice President Lena Gutierrez is being accused of fraud and other crimes for selling fake medicine to the public health system. Her trial could last 2 years and would leave her out of Congress for the rest of this administration.
Lena Gutierrez would lose her position as Honduras National Congress Vice President because of an accusation against her and her family's medicine company for selling fake medicine to the country's public health system. The President of the Supreme Court is the judge of this case and decided that there was enough proof to begin a trial against the legislative vice president.
A formal accusation was presented against Lena Karim Gutierrez Arevalo for the crime of fraud against the interest of the state and to the detriment of public administration. Also, there's an official accusation against Lena Karim Gutierrez, her sister Gineth Karime Gutierrez Arevalo, and Gladys Arias Rivera for complicity in the crime of falsification of public documents. The use of false documents against public health and other crimes to the detriment of public health administration.
Gutierrez's trial could last 2 years and what would force her to leave Congress for this administration. Each crime she is accused could mean at least 6 years in prison, so she could face a sentence of at least 10 years.
It was a strong hit to the ruling National Party's image because she has a very high-profile position. She's the Congress Vice President. She has been at the head of Congress for the last 5 or 6 years and has covered for President Juan Orlando Hernandez before and now for Congress President Mauricio Oliva. She's an important figure of the National Party and now their image is affected.
There is no official communication from Congress about Gutierrez's status, and the current accusation against her are just the first to go to trial. There are many other high-profile government officials accused of also being responsible of fraud against the state. Gerardo Torres, Telesur, Central America.
A U.S. university has sued the CIA to force it to release classified documents over war crimes committed in El Salvador by a U.S.-backed Army officer. Retired Salvadoran Army officer Colonel Sigifredo Ochoa is currently under criminal investigation for his complicity in a massacre in Santa Cruz back in 1981. He is accused of killing hundreds of civilians during El Salvador's brutal crackdown. On Monday, the University of Washington Center for Human Rights filed a lawsuit under the Freedom of Information Act, alleging that the CIA is illegally withholding information on the massacre. Argentina made one of its largest debt repayments ever on Monday. The country paid $5.9 billion on its Bowdoin 2015 bonds. The Argentine Central Bank chief says that the payment was made on time and that the country is keeping up with its repayment schedule. The money came from Argentina's foreign exchange reserves, which now total over $27 billion. After the economic collapse of 2001, Argentina renegotiated its debt with 93% of its creditors.
It's the first time that a government which issued a series of bonds is the same one that pays them and doesn't let someone else deal with it.
The worst drought in a century has damaged Cuban sugarcane that was set for harvest in the coming months. However, recent rainfall means that output could still top the previous harvest. Cuba produced 1.9 million tons of raw sugarcane during the 2014-2015 harvest, 18% more than the previous one. It is believed that similar growth is expected in the 2015-2016 season.
We are planning to do the cane estimate now and looking at doing the sugar cane harvest in the month of October. That is to say, we will know the results by October 25th. But there is no doubt that there has been some damage.
Mexican comedians are lambasting Donald Trump in a new play after his anti-American comments. The comedians, dressed in dark suits and blonde wigs a la Donald Trump, aims to satirize Trump and his comments that Mexicans are rapists and drug runners and advocating the deportation of millions. The show, called Sons of Trump, kicks off with a massive image of his grinning face projected onto a $100 bill, before a voice in a heavy American accent bellows "Welcome frijoleros," which is an anti-Mexican slur. And coming up, Russia has stepped up its strikes against the Islamic State in Syria, while NATO claimed they violated Turkish airspace. A report on this and more next.
Despite Discover Latin America and the world in our programs. Telesur Reports, The Real USA, the stories behind the tweets, Ataman, Lives, Know Your Body, Open Files, exposing the conflicts that affect our people, compelling personal stories, and the most controversial events. See it all on telesurtv.net in English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there.
Day by day, they're in the street with one mission: change the world through their actions. This is a different type of program, a conversation. The perspective you won't find in traditional media can be found on The Laura Flanders Show. Watch it on telesurtv.net/English. Telesur, wherever the news, you'll be there.
We need to understand the world we live in. We require news with critical points of view, thorough analysis, and social commitment. This information is vital to think, to understand, and to change. The world demands a new perspective. telesurtv.net/English. Wherever the news, you'll be there.
Representatives of the aid group Médecins Sans Frontières are saying that the US-led attack on the hospital in Kunduz, which killed 22 people, was unacceptable and is being considered a war crime. The US military has insisted that its airstrike over the weekend targeted Taliban fighters. However, the aid group's directorate president, Maini Nikolai, has called the US claim ridiculous, adding that, quote, "It's a relatively big hospital and is clearly visible and known to everybody. So a precise attack on this big hospital, if not proven differently, leads to a war crime," end quote.
Well, for this investigation is so important because this is an attack on humanitarian action. It's not an attack only on the hospital of Kunduz and on MSF. This attack is much larger because this hospital, once again, was doing what a humanitarian action does, treating the wounded of a warfare and very close to the front line. That is dangerous, but the Geneva Conventions should protect a hospital. If these conventions are no longer recognized by the big warring parties, we have a major issue on our mere existence and the action that we do. And not only MSF, but all humanitarian actions. That's why this inquiry is fundamental, to have an independent look at what happened, because the fundament of humanitarian action have been attacked.
And in response, the US said that it would never intentionally target a hospital.
First, I would like to discuss the tragic loss of lives in the strike on the hospital in Kunduz. By way of background, U.S. Special Operations Forces have been providing training, advice, and assistance to Afghan National Defense Forces who had been engaged in a tenacious fight with the Taliban. On Saturday morning, our forces provided close air support to Afghan forces at their request. To be clear, the decision to provide aerial fires was a U.S. decision made within the U.S. chain of command. A hospital was mistakenly struck. We would never intentionally target a protected medical facility. I must allow the investigation to take its course, and therefore I'm not at liberty to discuss further specifics at this time. However, I assure you that the investigation will be thorough, objective, and transparent.
Financial experts are hoping for greater economic growth for developed nations in the coming year, 2016. At their meeting in Peru, the IMF said that a return to robust global expansion remains elusive and that more needs to be done. It expects the Latin American economy to shrink by 0.3% this year, mainly due to low commodity prices. However, it expects a recovery in 2016 with a growth of 0.8%.
A number of large emerging markets are having especially difficult times this year. If we look at Brazil, we're projecting -3% for this year, -1% for next year. That's negative growth next year, but it's still a substantial improvement, and these bring up the aggregate numbers.
According to footage from Russia's defense ministry, one of its drones in Syria shows Islamic State forces moving vehicles close to mosques and residential areas in an attempt to protect them from air attacks. The Defense Ministry said it had struck 12 more Islamic State targets on Tuesday and that militants had begun to move their equipment into residential areas for protection. Meanwhile, NATO and Turkey expressed their concern over what they claim is a fresh violation of Turkish airspace. Here is Telesur's Hazim Abdullah with more.
For the second time in 2 days, Turkey summoned the Russian ambassador on Tuesday to protest against what it said was another breach by Russian warplanes of its airspace. The Russian response was that the first violation lasted only a few seconds and was the result of bad weather, and they were studying the allegations of a second violation.
The Turkish allegations about violations of their airspace are comical. The Russians did not hide the fact and said it did not exceed 5 seconds, while Turkey, which has been the main source of financing of terrorism for the last 5 years, seems oblivious to the fact that it constantly violates the sovereignty of an independent state.
For its part, NATO said that the incursion of the Russian aircraft into Turkish airspace over the weekend doesn't seem purely an independent error. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said Russia had not provided any real explanation for entering Turkish area twice, and this was unacceptable. Analysts see this as an attempt to put pressure on Russia in order to downplay the Russian achievement in such a short time.
The United States and its allies, such as NATO and Turkey, are trying as much as possible to portray Russian airstrikes as a failure, which have not been able to achieve their goals, especially if they expose coalition forces. Because in just a week, Russia has been able to destroy the control centers and the gatherings of terrorists, which is something the coalition forces have failed to do in all these months.
Russian fighter jets carried out a further series of raids targeting ISIS sites on the city of Palmyra and its suburbs. The Syrian military confirmed that these raids have resulted in the destruction of 20 transport units and 3 weapons stores belonging to the Islamic State extremists. Hazim Abdullah, Telesur, Syria.
It was just a classic quid pro quo criminal scheme. Those were the words of U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara on the revelation of a corruption scheme involving former President of the United Nations General Assembly, John Ash. Ash has been arrested and is currently being charged with accepting over $1.3 million in bribes during the years 2011 to 2014 from Chinese businessmen during his tenure in exchange for favors and the support of professional interests. Reports are that the scheme incorporated billionaires, high-ranking UN officials, government officials, and non-profit organizations. Gaza National and Islamic powers call for escalating military resistance against the Israeli troops in the West Bank.
The Palestinian National and Islamic powers in the Gaza Strip held Monday evening a press conference in which they argued their armed wings in the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem to escalate military resistance against the Israeli occupation forces. Member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Jamil Mizher, called on the President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, to declare a state of emergency and to stop all kinds of security coordination between the Israeli army in Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank.
The Palestinian bloodshed has not stopped. It's the means of our people to defend our holy sites, land, and rights. This proves that the Palestinian people are immortal and that the Zionist mad crimes against them will fail to break their will. Jerusalem is being exposed to an unprecedented Zionist attack aimed at Judaizing it and uprooting its Arab character and its Palestinian identity. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is besieged and the Israeli occupation is carrying out its plans for imposing a temporal division. The old city of Jerusalem is suffering the storming of citizens' homes, their continuous detention. The occupied West Bank is also exposed to a non-stopping Israeli aggression which has turned its cities and villages to isolated continents.
Tensions have run high in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem since the killing of 2 Jewish settlers near Itmar settlement in Nablus last week. Violent clashes have erupted since between Palestinian youth and Israeli occupation forces all over the occupied West Bank, leading to dozens of injuries and deaths among Palestinians. In the same context, Israeli troops and bulldozers surrounded yesterday 3 homes belonging to the Palestinians who carried out the attacks against the Israeli settlers, in a quick translation to the decisions of Israeli Security Cabinet yesterday. Despite the President of the Palestinian Authority Mahmoud Abbas ordering his West Bank-based security forces to prevent further escalations with the Israeli troops in an attempt to begin the calm, yet a week of unexpected violence has grown fears over the eruption of a third intifada. Noor Harazin, Telesu TV, Gaza.
Statistics from the Department of Labor of the United States show that employment in the country has been stagnant in the past 2 months. This demonstrates a deceleration in the nation's economy. Meanwhile, workers continue to denounce the violation of their fundamental rights. Bianca Perez has these details.
Workers in the United States continue to face violations of their basic rights by employers. Those who try to fight for rights such as higher salaries and basic benefits often see themselves fired by companies who do not respect their basic rights to organize.
I was fired in January of this year unjustly for my activism, because I fought for my rights and because I asked for better working conditions in our workplace.
Being an undocumented worker in the United States means being exploited at work, working long hours, and sometimes not receiving proper compensation. These reasons drive many workers to seek membership in unions.
Trying to change the law to make penalties stronger and more effective. We're trying to change the law to give workers more rights and protect them. We're trying to get comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship so 11.5 million workers can be exploited and cheated out of wages and denied fair conduct.
For many workers, being part of a union signifies large risks such as being harassed and even detained.
We have a long way to go in order to make sure that employers are held accountable for their actions in regards to retaliation and intimidation of their employees.
Annually, thousands of construction workers report being victims of physical injuries without the right to compensation or medical care. Bianca Perez, Telesur, Washington, D.C.
And now a brief look at other stories making news around the world.
According to the EU's Migration Commissioner, Italy will begin relocating refugees this week under a European Union plan that aims to relocate 160,000 refugees from Greece and Italy to other member states in the bloc. Over 500,000 people have poured into Europe so far this year, fleeing war and poverty in the Middle East, Asia and Africa.
The refugee crisis is affecting
So far, the Volkswagen scandal has not had an impact on jobs at the company. However, the car maker will reduce earnings at the core autos division as well as workers' bonus payments. The company will also be reviewing all projects and investments. And Facebook has announced plans to launch a satellite to bring internet access to large parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The youth of Kenya could not be happier. The satellite is currently under construction and will be launched next year. Some feel that improved internet services will help improve all sectors in the country.
A look at sports now. The West Indies cricket team are currently in Sri Lanka to battle it out with the Sri Lankan team. However, the West Indies are without head coach Phil Simmons, who questioned why all-rounders Dwayne Bravo and Kieran Pollard were not included in the squad. West Indies captain Jason Holder is leading a young team against the Sri Lankans without the experienced players and commented on it when speaking to the press.
Two young sides, two sides that, looking to turn the corner in a sense. We have some fresh faces, they have some fresh faces. So we're just looking to play the cricket day by day, session by session, and hopefully we can come out as winners at the end.
The public prosecutor has recommended an 18-month jail sentence and more than $2 million in fines for Lionel Messi's father, Jorge, in a tax fraud case. But the prosecutor reiterated that Lionel Messi should not have to face charges for allegedly defrauding the state from 2007 to 2009, as his father was in charge of his finances. However, the court has rejected the footballer's 2014 appeal and ruled that he could have approved the creation of a web of shell companies that were apparently used to evade taxes due on income from his image rights. And London's National Gallery has unveiled works by Spanish painter Francisco Goya in a new exhibition called The Portraits. The exhibition will open on Wednesday and will bring together some of Goya's best portraits for the very first time. The National Gallery was able to borrow his works from galleries all over the world, including some from private collections that have never before been seen. And there is more on these and other stories on our website, telesurtv.net/English. From our news teams in Quito, Ecuador, and right here in Caracas, Venezuela. For Telesur English, I'm Regan Devines. Have a great evening.